All right, we'll get started here in just a couple minutes. We're going to get some people logged in, and we'll let people get logged in and introduce themselves. I'm going to turn off my monitoring of my other laptop here real quick. My name is Greg Ondo. We're going to be doing the Hangout session today, going over your questions, and you see a number of questions already kind of coming in. So if you want to just quickly introduce yourself and tell us exactly where you're from. If you have questions, you can enter them in the comments field, and we'll try to get through as many questions as we possibly can. So we have some questions coming in already, and before we even started, we had 2 thumbs down. So it's always interesting. So we haven't even started our live broadcast, and 2 hours before we had 2 thumbs down. So all right, so you have some questions on VariAudio. All right, and some conversion of audio to MIDI. All right, so we have Columbus, Ohio. We have Alicante, Spain. I probably pronounced that way incorrectly. Okay, questions about the reverse function. We have South Africa, Buffalo, New York, East Orange, New Jersey, Switzerland. Always wanted to go there. Saginaw, Michigan. All right, Robbie from Dallas. Good to see you on. All right, we have Bay Area. It's just there last month. All right, so we have Germany, Providence, we have Israel, Madrid. We're going to let people get logged on, and then we'll get started with questions. So we have more people getting logged in. All right, Netherlands, Whiz Beach, UK. Frank from Boston. Good to see you on board online here. Blackpool, UK, Finland, Belgium, Greencastle, Pennsylvania. Who was also, we have Neil, who was in Alicante, Spain. Apparently it's a hotspot. New Jersey, Buenos Aires. Azerbaijan Republic. I probably said that totally incorrectly. Sweden. All right, Nigeria, Germany, Italy, Sri Lanka. And we have Crystal Music Studios there. Okay, so you see kind of snap to grid questions. We have Edinburgh, Grand Rapids. From a cold Canada, Oslo, Waterton, New York. So we had a quick question, is Halion Sonic an updated version of Hypersonic? It doesn't have the same exact content, but you could think of like kind of the same concept going forward with kind of a more contemporary engine. All right, so we have Belgium, Kazakhstan. All right, we have Craig Peters. Hey to you. All right, we have Israel, Helsinki, Tampa. All right, we have Cork, Ireland, Waukegan, Illinois, Paris, Morocco, Rotterdam, Kazakhstan, Denmark, Falls Church, Virginia. That's right near me, probably just a couple miles. Chester, UK. So we had a question, is this Cubase 10? Yes, it is. Okay. So we just had a question on quick rewind, start where's the transport button. So generally you can, let me just hide this real quick. The screen will look weird. Sorry about this. All right, so transport button. Okay. So we have a question, are there any restrictions within the color preferences in Cubase 10? I think it's pretty flexible. We could go over that. So we have questions for tutorials in Spanish. So I can send over my tutorials where it could be overdubbed in Spanish, but I think there's also Spanish subtitles. All right. Okay. So when can I try Cubase 10? Cubase 10 is available right now. I think there will be a trial version coming soon. All right. So some more questions. All right. So Arjen van Edinger it's his birthday today. And he's from the Netherlands. All right, we have Las Vegas. What plugins do for even and odd harmonics? Okay. Okay, so we'll just let a couple more people get logged in and we'll start in about 2 minutes. All right, so we have Italy in the house. Okay, so you see questions on drum maps. All right, so a lot of people still getting logged in. Okay. All right, so we have probably Lucas from Greece. Thanks for joining us. So I did see the question about VariAudio earlier, so we'll go over that. All right, so we're just seeing a question about the transport bar real quick before we get started. So you can probably just, if you grab the transport by the bottom here, at this point you could just expand the transport like that. Okay, and we'll get started here in just a couple minutes. Maybe 1 more minute and then we'll get started. All right, so we have Amsterdam. So you see a comment, will there be more tutorials on Cubase stock plugins? You feel like you're sleeping on a lot of them. Some I don't know how to use. So there are some coming. So question before we get started, what's the best way to move to Cubase 10? Would I install the upgrade or uninstall or do a complete install? So when you get Cubase 10, you get the complete install and you don't have to get rid of the previous version, so they remain intact and independent. All right, so we have Jamaica. That's great. Okay, we're look at the time. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. We have a lot of people logged in. I'm just going to kind of scroll way back, and I'll try to check back the comments as we do this. Okay, so I know we had a question. It seems like I may have lost some of the earlier questions. So, all right, so we had some questions. I'm just kind of scrolling through. I refreshed. I may have lost some of the earlier questions, but one of the questions I remember was, is the VariAudio 2, if we do like a vocal session in VariAudio 3, will that carry over and be able to be opened up into or go back to Cubase 9.5 and be able to have the VariAudio automatically carry over with the setting? So I did a quick test on it with this particular project. And what I did is I just very quickly took this into a new project and did some VariAudio test. And then when I opened that into Cubase 9.5, all the changes I made in VariAudio had carried over. I think the one thing that won't carry over is going to be perhaps the the one thing that didn't seem to carry over for me was the formant changes. But I did volume, I did some curves, and I did other tuning changes like quantizing, and those all seem to carry over as well. So the volume I did was a mute, so that was kind of already in there. So I'm not sure if the new functions would directly translate over, but it seemed like all the tuning translated over very easily with that. So we also had some questions. We had a question that someone asked about, is the master bus on kind of like a float point? So I wasn't quite sure what that question entailed. So as we kind of work with, inside of Cubase, everything is going to be working in 32-bit or 64-bit floating point precision. So to change that, and I could be completely wrong, and the overall purpose of the question. So so it didn't say floating point, but we could, if you go to your studio setup, since 9.5, at this point we could add, you could toggle between 32-bit floating point or 64-bit floating point for double precision. Since 9.54, one of the things that you had the capability is to record into as a 32-bit integer. So if you have a 32-bit converter, you could now record that directly into Cubase without having to truncate it down to 24-bit. And since that was introduced, we also had the capability of recording a 64-bit floating point file. And since it was asked on the master fader and it just said float point, so I'm not sure if it was for floating point specifically, but if you needed the master fader to move around and float independently in the window, I'm not sure if this was the intention of the question, but you could just go to your channel settings directly here and have that as a floating window. So we had a question about doing VariAudio or turning a actual bass recording into MIDI to replace the sound. So let's go ahead and take a quick look at how we can do that. So let's say we have our bass line here. So if I wanted to, I could double click here on my actual bass sample, and we could go into our VariAudio editor and we'll do the analysis of it here. And as we can see, we could just have our VariAudio analysis done here. Now, under the functions menu, we have the ability to extract MIDI. So I'm going to select this. We could retain a fixed velocity or a dynamic velocity. And one of the questions was, like, how do you want to carry over for different tuning? So I would choose that note and note expression to the VST3 tuning curve, depending on your instrument. If you're using something like in Hallian Sonic or Hallian samples or Retrolog or VST3 compatible instruments, you could do that. But you could also just have it with continuous pitch bend data. So the VST3 data would be a little more accurate for tuning. So, and then what I want to do is to create a new MIDI track with this. So I'm going to hit OK, and it's created this new particular MIDI track here. So if we want to double click, we can see our MIDI data. And if I wanted to route this out to a VST instrument, I'll just kind of come right here and we'll go to our Hallian Sonic SE. We'll create a MIDI track for that, and let's just find an electric bass sample. So let's say if I wanted to do like we'll just do a dry finger bass. And sometimes you may have to adjust the octave up. So I think sometimes when we do this with bass, it helps. So now what I want to do is to route this particular channel to the Hallian Sonic. And this is matched with the, you can hear the slides there. And listen to that in context, and we'll mute. And both of them together. So that's an easy way of doing it. And you could now just come over here and edit this entirely in the MIDI domain. One other question we had while we're kind of in the VariAudio editor. So let's say if I double click here and we see the VariAudio editor. So some people, find that it could be a little jarring initially to see like the black keys with a dark background, that the black keys are white versus, and this is just kind of make it consistent. So if this wanted to be changed, if you go into your preferences and then go to under your user interface, we could just go to your editor background and you could just lighten this up. And so if I make this brighter here, like previous versions, we could see that would automatically make just as a matter of contrast, make the darker keys, the black keys black, but just kind of within this, it's just kind of a user interface to kind of differentiate between the black keys on the piano keyboard and the white keys. All right, so let's go ahead and scroll through some different questions. And again, if I missed one of the early questions, feel free to kind of ask it again. All right, so we had a question on the snap to grid functionality. So let me go ahead and just take a particular drum loop. Okay, so now there's a couple things that people often miss with, snapping to grid. So if I turn snap on or off, we could do that by hitting the letter J on a computer keyboard. And there's kind of different modes. So I could have this automatically snap to the grid and have it only go to a bar where I can't necessarily place it, or we could snap this to a beat. So it's only going to snap to like beats 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, and I can't get it anywhere in between. And again, to temporarily disable that, just hit the J key, and then you can place it anywhere that you want, and that turns the snap on or off, and you can do that by clicking on this icon here. There's also different quantized values, so if you wanted to snap to 16th notes, you could do it just like so. But there's also a really handy one called adapt to zoom. So this snap can depend upon the level that the program is actually zoomed into. So as I zoom in, I could now just have it snap to the beat. And if I zoom in further, hitting like the H keys, we can have it snap to 16th notes. And again, if I zoom in further, we could just have that snap directly to 30-second notes. So it really kind of depends upon your level of zoom. So since that kind of came in with 9.5, I've really done kind of left it at adapt to zoom, and found that that's done a lot of great stuff for that. All right, so let's go ahead and going through different questions here that were kind of sent in. And again, when I refreshed my browser, and it may have cut off a couple of them, some of the early questions, so feel free to re-ask those if you want. Okay, so I'm just going through. All right, so we had a question on, can we talk about some of the different MIDI recording modes? How do you set it up if it's recording MIDI, even if you're not recording? So that is probably, so you can see your different MIDI record modes directly here on the transport. And as you do this, we could choose to, like during, linear and cycle remorting, you could have it automatically create new parts, or if you wanted them to be merged or to replace. During cycle record, you could also do stacked, or which will create different lanes, and you could also enable the auto quantize. Now, the mode that you're probably thinking of is going to be what we call the retrospective record. So I'm going to come here to the key commands, and I'm just going to refresh my memory. Okay, so with MIDI, we could do this for MIDI and audio, but I think we could, if you just go to the transport menu, so at this point, we could say, so let's say if I just played in some MIDI, and I wasn't in record, you could go to your transport here and just say MIDI retrospective record, and then that would automatically be recorded. So what I just kind of played in would be just captured directly right there. So again, if you wanted to record MIDI information, let's say you're just noodling around and you go, oh, this is the best thing ever. Again, go to your transport and you can set up keyboard shortcuts for this and just say retrospective record, and then it'll just automatically show up. Okay, so we have just a quick rewind to start, and what's, how to do that. So there's a number of different preferences that you could set up. So, and one of them that's handy is, so if we come here, we could just say, you could just go directly to your previous marker or to your next marker. with this function in the transport. And if you don't actually see those buttons on a transport, just grab and hold down the left mouse button just to the edge, and you could expose more of those different functions directly there. As another preference that people often miss, and we'll just get to the preferences under transport is a handy one. And you could actually kind of set this up as a keyboard position, but there's also so if you go preferences to transport, there's a return to start position on stop. So now if I played from a particular area, and now when I stop, it'll go directly back to where it was. And without that preference enabled, you could come directly here, and when that's turned off and I stop, it'll stop and maintain the playhead position at that moment in time, just like that. So that's a handy preference, but just being able to navigate directly to different markers if you wanted to, or to be able to make sure that you have these kind of enabled here within your transport, and that should make a lot of sense. All right, so someone's looking for an easy way to communicate with Wavelab 9.5. There's a couple ways. One is directly from your different audio editors. So if I want to take like this particular guitar part, I could now just say edit in Wavelab, and that would automatically now kind of launch Wavelab. Just select another file that doesn't have that processing, so I could just say I'll just take a new file here real quick that doesn't have to be rendered. So at this point I could choose to edit directly in Wavelab, and Wavelab launches and will launch this particular file for editing. I could also just take my mix down. So at this point, if I wanted to take between my left and right locators, and we choose to go to our export audio mix down, at this stage, you'll have under advanced options, let me see where this got moved to, but there's a kind of after export, we could just say open directly into Wavelab Pro 9.5. And then from within Wavelab, if you wanted to find that you needed to tweak something like the vocal up or down, you could launch the Cubase project that was automatically generated the file, the mixdown file itself, so you could easily tweak. All right, so we had a question, any way to route the audio out of a VST instrument directly to an audio track? There's a couple ways. It may not be totally direct, but you could have this kind of set up quite easily. So we'll create a new empty project. I'll just come over here and just go through the different kits. Okay, so let's say if I have some patterns here. Okay, so there's two ways of kind of routing this so that we could have this routed as an audio file. One is I could create a group track. Okay, and I'll make this a stereo group. And what I could do now is take this particular, the audio output of this, and then I could route it to my group, and then add an audio track. We'll make it a stereo track. And what we want to do is to set the group as the input. So I'll just go ahead and hit record here. And if I do everything correctly. So at this point, if we wanted to just listen to your audio source, we could now we see a pattern change up here. So again, we could route it to a group. Another method is to go to your VST connections, and let's go to the outputs, and you could create just a stereo output bus and really not even have it connected, and route the instrument to that output bus. And then for the inputs, you could just have the inputs defined of that bus. So kind of an easy way to look at that. All right, I'm going to take a quick look at comments, make sure everything is going okay in the present tense. Okay, and we're just going to scroll back. Okay, just reading through some different comments here. All right. Thanks everyone for great questions. All right, so question is, how do I use my MoXF with Cubase 10 using VST? So probably what you want to do is, I believe they have a VST editor. I haven't played with the MoXF extensively yet, but if you go to your audio connections, at this point we could say, define it as an external instrument. And at this point, you could add an external instrument and tell it like this. And what you want to do is to tell the channels where it's connected to on your audio interface. And at that point, if it has a VST editor, you could have that kind of associated with it. And when we go to your VST instruments here, we can say let's go to an instrument track. You'd see it show up under external plugins. So you need to connect it to available inputs and outputs of your audio interface. Sometimes people use the MoXF as the audio interface as well. I believe it'll do like transmit USB over audio. And then you could just simply define the input connection where it's passing the audio. But again, go to your audio connections and go to your external instruments, and this is in the Cubase Pro, and then you could just set up the connection of where it's actually routed to, and then you could treated very similar to VST instruments. All right, so a question, do I have any info regarding driving channels in DMXIs? If you could tell me what a DMXI is, I'm sorry, it's just not jumping out at me what it is, if it's a particular instrument or if it's maybe like MIDI lighting, something like that. So we have a question, are we going to do a hangout on Groove Agent 5 in the future? Yeah, I'll see if we can sneak one in before the holidays, or it might be right after the holidays with calendars and some time off. All right, so we have a question from Mixing and Mastering, why Cubase doesn't save the mix console settings. Is it a bug? Let's take a look at it. I just did a test a couple minutes ago, and that seemed to save all the mix settings. I'll just do a new project. All right, so let's come over here. I'll just hide my input channels quickly. All right, and I'm going to just add some different insert effects here. I'll select all the channels, and we'll hold down Alt and Shift, and we'll just do it on the, so let's say I wanted a compressor on every one of the channels, and I could just kind of move these compressors down. Okay, and so at this point, I'll go to my full mix console view. So I'll have different inserts, and let's say EQs I'll tweak. Okay, and then what I'm going to do is just go to this little drop down menu, and since I have this channel selected, I will say save selected channels. Okay, and I will go through my history here, and we'll go back to where everything was back to square one. So now I don't have any EQ. I have no inserts, and let's go ahead and recall, load the selected channels. And at this point, here's our December Hangout VMX file. And let's go to the inserts. We can see the inserts, everything stored there. We could also take mix console snapshots if you wanted to, but that seemed like it loaded up all of the files. Okay, so let's see if there's is there an attached key command to reset all mixer faders to Unity? I think if you wanted to, if you hold down the control or command key on each of the faders, you could just click there and do that. I know some people will just take a snapshot and do that. You could, let's see if it's maybe available in the Project Logical Editor. Let's just take a quick look. I'll just... I don't see a particular way of doing it to multiple tracks, but you could save an initial snapshot and do that, or one by one, or maybe just try a couple of other things here, key combinations. I know you could probably also set it to absolute mode. So if I come here, and let's say if I had these linked, so if you wanted to link all the channels temporarily, and then just put the link mode to absolute, then as you change one, so let's say if I come here and we'll choose to unlink these. So now if you go to absolute mode, you could just do it like that and hold down Control or Command and have the values all go. And if you have it in absolute, what that would allow you to do, or if you have it in the suspend and we have them all linked together, at this point you could kind of keep the proportionality of it. But if you go to absolute, then as you change one fader, they would all go to the same value. So that's an easy way if you have like 100, different tracks or several thousand tracks. All right. So questions like, what plugins do you use to obtain even and odds and harmonics? We used to have a lot of plugins that did that when we kind of dealing with, a lot of interfaces that weren't so good, but, you could often achieve kind of the same exact thing through just EQ. So let's say if you want to go and set the frequency here to G3, at this point we could set the frequency to like G5 for this particular band. And let's say for our high end, you could turn this on and double click and just set the frequencies by the note. And that way you could actually EQ based on kind of the overtoned series, just like that. So that's an easy way of doing it. And a lot of Exciter plugins are in essence kind of doing something similar to that. There are, let's just see, some people will do some pitch shifting plugins, but a lot of it is you could kind of get, manipulate the overtone series for your odd and even harmonics, through simple EQ. Okay, so a question, my BFD3, I set drum sound to say MIDI channel 1, yet my drum map only picks it up on channel 2. Why? Make sure that you have the correct MIDI channel defined here. So say if I add an instrument track, and we'll do just like a Groove Agent SE here. So make sure that this MIDI channel is matching. Now, when you work with a drum map, something that a lot of people miss is when dealing with like a drum map in the editor. And I get this question a lot of, everything changed to, I don't hear it as soon as I opened up a drum map. So you may have to just come here and then, change the setting for all of your different selected channel, elements within your drum map. And we'll take this to a bigger screen. So if I wanted to extend this out, I think if I select one of these, remember the keyboard shortcut to change multiple ones. There's a keyboard modifier to switch all these at once, but make sure that this drum map is matching up. So the drum map can also impose the MIDI channel and route that, but make sure that your MIDI channel here is also set correctly, and that should make sense for you. So we have a question. I think we touched base on this earlier, but we'll reiterate it. So when can I try the trial version? I think we'll see it out very soon, probably maybe before Christmas. So we had a question, is there an issue with drag and drop? I think drag and drop stuff has been significantly improved, especially in version 10. So if you wanted to drag and drop different elements, you could do different audio files or plugins quite easily. So at this point, you just go to your media. So if I wanted to have like a reverb send, I could select my reverb, come here, drag. If I drag it to where you see the green arrow, I could put that as an insert, or I could place it as an effects channel track. Just like that, we can now see all of your different plugins in different with graphic user interfaces. So if I wanted to take different plugins here and drag those out to different plugins as inserts, at this point I could just drag it to like an audio track, place that as an insert. If I have the inserts open, you could drag any plugin to any specific insert slot as well. So, and even if we wanted to collapse all the views and see, VST instruments, as you saw me do earlier, we could just drag and drop just like that. So, but any audio files as well. So if you have different loops, at this point, we could just go directly back to your media and say I wanted to find my different loops here, and if I wanted to create a new track, just drag and drop between new tracks or place it onto like an existing audio track, just drag and drop like that. So I think the drag and drop has been working great, but if you have like specific things you wanted to know how to better drag and drop, just let me know in the comments. All right, so a question, I'd really like to know how to use VST3 capabilities on third-party VSTs. I can't figure out how to set it up when a VST is VST3. There's not much examples online. So, from VST2 to VST3, some of the significant differences are that a plugin can only take processing power when it's actually being used. So if a plugin, if I had like an effects plugin, I wouldn't necessarily see that if it was not being, it wouldn't be taking or taxing the computer. So if you actually look at, your plugin manager, and we could access this from our right-hand side, or the ability to come from our studio menu, and then at this point, we could just go to our VST plugin manager. Here you could see, what plugins are And if they're going to be like VST 3.5, which is kind of the later, there's 3.6, and some of the like virtual instruments that are VST 3.5 and higher will allow you to take advantage of doing stuff like the note expression editing. So if I wanted to double click on a particular note, at this point I could draw in independent controllers like that. So you could try it out. There's not a lot of third-party instruments. Some of the major plugins still haven't done VST3, even though it's been 13, 14 years. So so there's still some major companies that don't support VST3 for some odd reason. But there's a lot of significant advantages. So, but you could tell often if a plugin is, like let's say if I come here and I wanted to look at a list of plugins, just in your plugin manager, whether, what format that plugin is. All right, so we had a question from Linda looking for easier ways to work with MIDI. So if there's a particular thing that's confusing, if you could let me know. So question, is it possible to quantize all MIDI notes that come too late? Or how's it possible? All right, so let's say if we wanted to quantize notes that come after the beat. Okay, so we could do this probably in a logical editor. So I'm just going to go to MIDI, and let me select a MIDI event, and let's go to our logical editor. So what you could do is we want to choose to select, and we can say types that are equal to note, and we say position. And let me just see if we can do. Let me see if I can approach it from maybe a MIDI quantize from the advanced quantize settings. All right, so if you wanted to just kind of set your catch range in non-Q, you could determine kind of the catch range. I'm not sure if that would differentiate between early or late. And let me see. And another question was, and I may have to work on this a little bit, but is it possible to select notes that are not followed by the same note? Let's see if we get. I'm not sure if we can do that. Let's see. Okay, so let's say we want to do notes and we want to say value 1. At this point, we could say Not. I may have to play with that. I'm not sure if it's possible to do that. But I'll play around with it. And if you want to email me at gondo@yamaha.com, I can play around with it some more. So, all right. So we'll go ahead and move on. But those are great questions. I think we may be able to work with it. All right, so we have a question, Maschine Studio 2 and Cubase 10, how to work. So, it should show up kind of as a plugin, and then you also used a hardware controller just like any MIDI controller. So you should be able to, once you have it installed, see your Maschine at that point show up as it, within your plugin list for your VSTs, and then it would also show up as your MIDI input device. You should see the Maschine hardware driver, so it shouldn't be anything out of the ordinary for that. All right, so I'm just going to scroll down to the bottom, make sure everything is going okay, since I have to go beyond like the real-time comments. Okay. Okay, so we'll kind of move on. So question more on how to utilize chord tracks, please. Like follow root note and stuff. Okay, so let's take a look at chord tracks. So let me just throw up, I think I may have a project. Okay, so we'll just come here. So let's say if we're like the chord track is really handy for, you could use it as a compositional aid. So let's say I have just a Halion Sonic SE loaded up with a Rhodes patch. And at this point I could draw in kind of different chords to try out ideas. So let's say I want that and maybe followed by B flat. And let's say I wanted to end on a C chord. All right, and let me just make sure that this patch is loaded up really quickly. Just load up a quick. So just load up a quick electric piano. All right, so now when I play back, so we could try out these different ideas. And as we do this, one of the cool things is, you could double click on a chord and you have a chord assistant where you can see kind of notes based on proximity or the circle of fifths. But what's interesting is you could also say, I want to look at common notes, and this will give you kind of musical suggestions for chords. And you could look at before and after. So at this point, we could just say, and give you different chord suggestions. Now, the chords can also be, you could have like first inversion where probably the third of the chord is the lowest note, or second inversion. And if we go to the chord pads here, We could also have it set up for different components here. So we could say I wanted to have more piano players or more guitar voicings. And if you wanted to transpose this, you could come here and just say I wanted to be in the key of E. And then if I wanted to take this particular element here, we could just drag those down directly to different chord tracks. Now, if we have an existing part here, so let's say if I have just a quick composition. So when I come here, I could take an existing part and then we could have different parts follow the chord track. So maybe my drums, I don't want to follow the chord track, but my electric piano, I want it to follow the different chord tracks here. Now there's different options. So when we define kind of a, depending on the chords that we have, so let me just put in something in like G major here. So I will come here and say, okay, I want G. Let's add maybe an E minor chord. Let's do kind of the most cliche chord progression. So we could do this. So if a track is set to follow the chords, what we could see here is that I will move this over. So let me just get it so you can see it a little better here. So when I go to, let's say, this chord here, and I type in a new chord, you'll see all the MIDI notes follow based on what I've entered in here. So that will actually change. Now, once the chords have been defined, we see the key here. So we could have it follow the chords exactly. We could have the voicings do chords and scales. So, and it's determined that this is in G major from looking at the chords. Or you could have it just do root notes, and root notes would allow you to do like just for bass, where the bass is going to follow this. So if I put in like an E minor with a B in the bass, that way if I select from the follow chord track type to root notes, it would go to a B instead of the E minor. So you could take multiple tracks here and choose for them to follow the different chord tracks. And some tracks like percussion you may not want to follow, but this will work for any MIDI or monophonic audio. So you could do it for a vocal, background vocals, or bass, and have that automatically follow. So you could think of chords and scales where different voicings will automatically follow the chords and scales, or just the chords, or just within the scales, or just root notes. So those are some of the different voicings that you could play around with. All right, so we'll move on. Says when I route multiple outs from Kontakt to Cubase, I always have to create one MIDI channel to the audio channel. Is there a way to route a Kontakt output to, let's say, an instrument track instead? So it should be, I don't have Kontakt on my machine, but you should be able to load up Kontakt either as an instrument track, or I'll just start brand new project here. So if I start with like an instrument track, I'll do it with Hallian, which is a sampler as well. So we'll just go ahead and get the Hallian loaded up. All right, so we have just a patch loaded in Hallian. Now, what some people can get confused in is, I want to have multiple outputs here. So at this point, if you just kind of click here, you could say activate outputs, and you could have multiple outputs activated directly from an instrument track. So if you wanted to take drums and route them to multiple outputs, and you could also do this directly from here. So if we go to activate outputs and click, you could see multiple outputs, even though it's from an instrument channel. So I'm just going to reread the question. So I think that may answer what you're looking for. If not, just let me know. And it's from Magnus. All right. So we see a question or comment, chord detection would be a great upgrade. So it does it already on MIDI stuff, so a lot of people don't know that. So let's see. And to show that, I'll just open up a quick project. So if I have the piano selected here, you could go. And so we'll go to the project menu to chord track. And now I could say create chord symbols once that's selected. And this will automatically make all the chord symbols for you. So I'll just delete these. So if I want to take the piano part at this point, and then the chord tracks automatically create it. So there's a question. Any ideas for a composer template using plugins within Cubase? It could be really different for, every composer as to what sounds they find will be useful within their palette. So, there's a lot of people, composers will often, if you're doing more electronic stuff, you're doing hybrid electronic and orchestral, the plugins can really matter. So if you're doing orchestral stuff, a lot of people love using like the reverence convolution reverb. You get into Iconica, which will and kind of build up a template. But I think if you go to 10 different composers, their templates will be set up quite differently, and what sounds they find are useful for them. So it's kind of hard to indicate. Okay, so we have a request for more tutorials on Logical Editor. So we have a second round of tutorials coming. So the question, how would someone upgrade from educational version 9.5 to full version? You would just do the normal upgrade process. So there's nothing special going from an educational version. I don't think that there is a specific educational update or upgrade price since the discount was already applied on the initial license. Okay, so I think this is a question getting back to yes, the comment, yes, a 3264-bit float point. So, one thing that could be a little confusing is like even if you have 16-bit, 20-bit, or 24-bit audio, as soon as any function has been changed, even adding 1 dB of one band of an EQ on one track, then everything, once something has been altered in a mix engine, then it's at 32-bit or 64-bit floating point, depending on what stage you have. So it may be different than some other programs. So we have a question: when are we getting support for the complete Control A series? I think that's probably the Native Instruments controller, so we can't really update their controllers. So you should really perhaps contact them. So contact the manufacturer of the complete Control series, since we tend not to do software for other companies. Okay, so we had a question. Is it backwards compatible with 32-bit plugins? So since version 9, Cubase has been 64-bit only. If you still need to run 32-bit, which can significantly increase system instability, you could get a third-party solution like JBridge. I think most people that have gone all 64-bit have been very happy that they did for overall system stability. Okay, so we have a question. I always seem to have to add 2 Sonic SE instances to get sound. I can then delete the first one. This happened in 9.5 and now in 10 on Mac OS. Any ideas? I've never come across that, so I'm not sure what could be causing that. But if you wanted to send me a project where one file isn't working and where that's occurring to you, I'd be happy to take a look at it, and you could send it to Ondo@yamaha.com. All right, so we have a question. Hi, Greg. Will we have R2 support before the 10.5 update? Yes, Steinberg announced it should be probably available in the first quarter of 2019, so that should be before the 10.5 update, and that will be a free maintenance update to add that functionality. Okay, so question: is it possible to change right-click object selection to simple select, like in Cubase 9 or 9.5? So by default, if you're using kind of the toolbox mode, and I think this, let's say I switch to like the eraser tool. If I just tap my right mouse button, it jumps right back to the select button. So, and I believe that's how the smaller tool set would work. So if I have a different tool selected, just a quick right mouse click reverts back to the object selection tool. So hopefully that answers that. So that seems to be kind of working the same. So if I have a scissors tool, I'm here, just right click, I'm back to my object selection tool. Okay, so question: my audio connections, orange bars in the upper panel seem to have disappeared in Cubase 10. All right, so let's take a look. So I'm not sure what orange bars you're referring to. I know sometimes that people may get orange bars. I'm not sure if that is perhaps what you're thinking of, and that could be just when the left and right locators are reversed and cycle is enabled. So I'm not sure if that is what you're talking about, but it doesn't seem like that's in the audio connections. So maybe if you could reiterate the question, that would be great and helpful. Question: do I know how to find the most fat kick drum sound? Usually it can be done with processing. So just kind of give you an idea quickly. There's a number of different ways to do it, but one plugin to really play around with would be the envelope shaper, which is found in Cubase. So I'll just do a new project here. And I'm not sure if you're looking for a fat kind of acoustic kick or just a fat, like electronic kick, but this plugin will work great on kind of either. So let's just say we just do a Groove Agent SE. All right, so I will quickly load up a kit with some patterns. We'll find something here. All right, and you could run this as a plugin within Groove Agent or just directly on your master bus as well. So let's say we'll just play a quick pattern here. So say an electronic. All right, so let's say we'll just kind of play that pattern. So let's say if I now want to take the audio out of that particular channel and I could run it through. All right, I won't kill your ears, but let's come over here to, and you can find it under Dynamics. So you can, and again, it's called the envelope shaper. So if I just wanted to take this pattern here, or if you want it to be, so you can adjust the attack, the length. So that's a great plugin to get like fat, huge kick drum sounds. There's tons of great new content for electronica stuff in Groove Agent SE. If you go to the Laser Beam kit, and if you want more acoustic stuff, we could also just go to like the kit SE. So let's go ahead and just try a quick. And see how this pattern is on. All right, so if I go to my instrument here, and again, just open up the envelope shaper. So like the release, and you can have more of an output stage there. So without. So I kind of consider the envelope shaper kind of like an anti-suck plugin on drums. So question, will there be a standalone version of VST amp rack for bass? I have it on my desktop Pro 10. I would like to have it on my laptop for Elements 10. I haven't heard of any plans for a standalone VST amp rack or the VST bass amp. What you could do is just simply move your USB-E licenser between the two computers, but I haven't heard of any plans for a standalone version of the plugins. Question, is there any way Cubase will work with the Akai MPC? I'm a big MPC user and would love hardware integration. So it seems like the MPC will already work as an instrument. It should be able to sync via MIDI clock or MIDI time code. If you have internal sequences, it should be able to allow you to use as a MIDI controller. So you should be able to use it already. And if there's limitations, I think some of the newer ones have. I haven't kept up with MPCs in a long time, but the newer ones have VST instrument versions, so you should be able to integrate it very well. Is there a way to run Cubase 10 with Pro Tools using two systems? System 1, Cubase 10, System 2, Pro Tools. What some people do is maybe like some composers I've seen have a print rig, they call it, where they just kind of capture in and they just simply synchronize via MIDI timecode. So you can send MIDI timecode from Cubase, and we could do that in like the project synchronization setup. So if we come here to your transport, at this point you should be able to go to the project synchronization setup, and you could send MIDI timecode, and at this point send it to different destinations or machine control. Some people, if you have a SMPTE to MIDI timecode converter, you could also add an audio track. And at this point, one of the plugins that you could have under tools would be a SMPTE generator. So you could definitely synchronize the two computers together in a number of different ways. Okay. So I see someone mentioned if you run Rewire with Pro Tools and Cubase, and you can. I'm not sure if both of them can be a Rewire, if either of them could be a Rewire slave, but I could be wrong. I know that Cubase isn't. So once again, we had a question: is there any news on Cubase 10 trial? Trial page is down. I can't demo 9.5 nor 10. I'm really excited to try out Cubase. So I haven't. I think we may see it within the next week or two. So it's usually after, after a couple weeks they release it. So we had a comment. I didn't get the grace period update for just one day, which is very unfair. You may want to try to contact. Sometimes if you give a good story to your Steinberg distributor, you might be able to. Sometimes they may, if it's from one day, if you haven't purchased the upgrade, you could always try to call the local Steinberg distributor or send an email and see if that makes it. But there is a cutoff for a reason, and I know it's a bummer if you miss it, but you could always try to send a nice email. So. So we have a question. Is there a way to input preset name in Hallian Sonic from the keyboard? Seems like Steinberg deleted that function. Let's go ahead and take a look. I'll try in Hallian Sonic SE and Hallian Sonic just in case. So if we come here and just type in, so let's say I'm looking for bass, we could type in, and since you specifically said Hallian Sonic, I'll check Hallian Sonic as well, just in case you didn't say it incorrectly or type it incorrectly. And again, it looks like the area is just right there. So let's say just piano. And it looks like you could type it in. So it looks like you could type in Hallian Sonic and Hallian Sonic SE. Okay, so it says in Win 10, I've selected the CPR files to be open in Cubase 10, but it keeps opening in Cubase 9. Any suggestions? So generally, that's an operating system issue, but you could always just kind of right-click and then, say open with and choose Cubase 10. So you could I'm not sure if you did it for every CPR file or told the CPR files within the operating system. But that's usually kind of an operating system level thing as to which program. Okay. So I see a comment from Clint. I run Rewire with Cubase and use Reason and Ableton. So those both will work as Rewire slaves, but I don't think Pro Tools will. Okay, so it says, I'm a bit confused about 3D audio. Why can I not edit in Wavelab, which runs in the background, or is Wavelab Pro unable to render 3D audio? Is that still coming? So I'm not sure if Wavelab has announced like support for doing ambisonics work, but currently I don't believe Wavelab is going to support the 3D audio, so that's why it's kind of being handled in Cubase with the appropriate encoding and decoding for the ambisonics bus. So, but I'll mention that to our planning teams. So comment in Windows 10, my CPR files have blank sheer icons just like the backup files. Any suggestions? Okay, so I don't have any ideas with that, and all of mine kind of have the same files. Okay, so we have a question. Hey, Greg, could you assign duplicate track to a keyboard shortcut, then duplicate a track with audio to see if the EQ works as it should? So, yeah, we'll go ahead and do that real quick. Okay, so I have this file here. So I'll have that as a reference. And we'll go duplicate that track. Okay, so it says, let's see if the EQ works as it should. Okay, so let's go ahead and all right, so this is the files here. So the two files. So we have EQ on one of the tracks and no EQ. So that seems to be working. So when you duplicate tracks, and I will go ahead and close this, and we'll look at a track with the EQ. So let's say if I come here, that's the track with the EQ, and let's go ahead and duplicate the track. And now when I open up this particular channel here, that EQ. So it seems to me that the EQ is working as it should. So if you make a change in one, that won't necessarily change the other unless you have them set to be linked with the EQ. So to me, it looks like it's working as expected. All right, I just saw that someone's not hearing anything. So just if someone could leave a quick comment if you're hearing, okay. I did one hangout where we're all right. So I'm just gonna jump back. Okay, just going back through some of the other ones here. Okay, so let me just cycling back to where we were. Sorry, we have a lot of questions. Okay. Okay, so we had a question. I've got an issue using the MR816X Firewire card in Cubase 9.5. Actually, it doesn't work while the progress bar is stuck. I'm on Yosemite 10.105. The system recognizes the interface properly. 10.105 is kind of a bit of an older version for. I'm not sure if that is, you may want to check to make sure 10.105 is still good for Cubase 9.5. So you may want to check to see if that's the minimum requirements. So a question on, is there a maximum high note in VariAudio? I know that there is a high note. I know I ran into a guy who's like, a world famous whistler who had some notes that were too high. I don't know what the actual pitch is. So we have a question: why does Cubase Artist says it allows 64 tracks of audio and it allows me to load in 61? I will check that. I don't have it currently on my system, but I'll check that out if you want to email me at giondo@yamaha.com after. Okay, so we had a question. Can different quantize values be used between piano roll and track editor? Right now, if I change the value in the piano roll, it is also changed in the track view. All right, so let's take a quick look at that. I think what it's going to be is that the quantize settings are going to be global. But what you can do, what I have set up is just, keyboard shortcuts. So if we go to your key commands, and then you could just set up kind of like quantize presets. And here you get to set up, keyboard shortcuts to switch. But I think the quantize settings are kind of deemed global because you could do it from the project window, to quantize from the project window, as opposed to just within the editor. But I could pass that on as a feature suggestion if you think it's so. I can see where it can make sense to maintain that. Okay, so I think this question is, again, is it possible to quantize only those MIDI notes that come too late, i.e. quantize only at the start time of the note after quantizing will be earlier than the original? And as I mentioned before, I will see if I could set up a quantized scenario for that, or to select. I don't know one off the top of my head, because it would generally, do it for notes that were behind as well as notes that were early. So we have a question, just logged in. Any info regarding third-party plugins not working correctly in Cubase 10? I've seen a lot of comments on the forums with that. So I know there's maintenance releases coming soon. So maybe that will do it. I haven't seen what is going to be, applied in the maintenance. Okay, so we have a question: how to delete, turn off an instrument track like Hallian, and it doesn't disappear from the rack view from the track view either. So if we had our VST instrument, and let's say you mentioned Hallian. Okay, so if you actually just kind of click directly here, you could activate the instrument. It's basically an on-off button directly from the rack. Now, some people often, I get this question a lot, how people, I wanted to unload that particular instrument, and this is probably not the question that you asked, but you could just choose no VST instruments, and that will get rid of the instrument. So each instrument has its own little on-off button that you could toggle right here. So we had a question on like shedding light on pitch bend automation. So if we have let's say my Hallian Sonic here, so I see a lot of people that want to go to, use automation to draw in pitch bend data here. So we could obviously just select pitch bend within your editor here and draw in pitch bend data, but some people want to do it with, the Bezier curves. So if you want to do that, we can go to your automation lane and click on more. At this point, we'll say Hallian Sonic, and we could say slot 1, or go to MIDI channel. make sure that I have something loaded up here. And then usually you could find it. Let me just load up a retro log or something really quick here. So go to retro log here, and then MIDI controllers, and then go all the way to the bottom, pitch bend. And now we could just draw in various kind of pitch bend curves. So again, what you do is just kind of come here, go to more, and I know it's a bit of an arduous process. So go to the retro log, go to the MIDI controller, channel 1, scroll all the way to the bottom, and you'll see pitch bend there. All right, so I'm seeing a comment about Cubase IC Pro crashing when loading sessions with very large track count. I could look into that for you. I don't have my iPad with me currently. So question, is there an easy way to colorize several instruments in one color? I tried to select 3 or 4 instruments and set one color for them, but it only works in one instrument was colored. All right, so we'll do a new project. All right. All right, so if you wanted to change multiple tracks, I think if you hit Alt Control or Alt Shift C, you can just get the color picker tool. And now that those are all selected, you can colorize just like that. And you could have the color picker tool directly available from the top. If you go to the cog wheel here, you can then see the color menu. So at this point, if you just hit that, that window can stay open. And as we wanted to change various colors, you could do like that. Or if you have different parts, like this, and let's say if you wanted to and take the middle ones, you know, we could have a Christmas themed color scheme here if you want. So you could do stuff like that very easily with the color tool. So, and you could also, for an individual track, just use the scroll wheel here and change the color on one single track. Let me see if holding down Shift. Yeah, so that would be one track at a time. But having the color tool here is really handy once you get used to it. I know it's different than previous workflows. Okay, so seeing Halion is often crashing on my Cubase session, even with a new powerful computer. Can you explain what to do? One thing you may want to check out is, you know, obviously samplers are fighting RAM versus streaming from hard disk. So if we add an instrument track, sometimes if the amount of preload is set incorrectly, that could kind of really hinder the overall performance. So if we go to options, just go to your and under the streaming section, try to increase the maximum preload up and see if that makes a difference. That way you're not fighting for RAM. It could load up more of the content into RAM. So that's something that you could do. So again, just come here within Halion, go to the options tab and try adjusting the maximum preload up. And that may help you out. Okay, so question, will I be able to select and group tracks from the project window in a future update? So let's take a look. Let's say I have 8 tracks here, and if we wanted to group them together, I could come here. And let me see if there's... So within the mix console on the project window, you could choose the add group channel to selected channels. Just like that. And then these will all be routed to the group. And let me just... So you could do it from there. And if you have the, let's say if I had a second group channel, I'll just try this. If the group channel is already selected, but that we could now hold down the Alt or Option plus Shift. And now all the selected channels have been routed to an existing group. So there's a couple ways to do it already from the project window. One from the project, from the mix console in the lower zone, or if you have an existing group, just hold down Alt and Shift and change the routing. So it says, Greg, I purchased Halion 6 upgrade recently and I'm moving to a new computer. Am I able to download full version in my Cubase since my Halion 5 is gone? Thanks. You could get it directly from the Steinberg download assistant. So yes. Okay, question from Argentina. I would like to know how to mute several folders at once because I've not found a way to do it yet. So let's go ahead and give it a shot. I will... Okay, so I'm just going to add these to a folder. Then I'm going to duplicate the folder. right, so I tried a couple of different of keyboard shortcuts. Okay, so all right, so if you wanted to be able to mute multiple folder tracks, so what you could do is create a Project Logical Editor preset. I know it's probably not the most ideal solution, but you wanted to, on the filter target, container type is equal to folder track. And then under the bottom, you want to say track operation. And we have this set to transform for the function. Track operation is mute, and you could have it set to enable, disable, or toggle the mute status, the status, like that. And then, as you can see, even if they're selected or not selected, and then if you wanted to also say property is equal to event is selected, this way you could only do it on selected, mute on selected events as well. So that doesn't seem to work. But so you can play around with the Project Logical Editor for that. So I see a question, Greg. I don't seem to have any Project Logical presets or MIDI logical presets in Cubase 10. Oddly, there are the required XML files in the preset folders, Logical Edit, Project Logical Editor, and Windows. I had that happen to me on one system I was helping someone with, and what we did is we just deleted those files and it was rebuilt. I think that's what we did. I think it just rebuilt it, but probably if you just hold down Alt Control Shift when you boot Cubase, you could try to temporarily disable the presets, the preferences, but you could try to just move those files to somewhere like on your desktop and see. I think there's a chance that they will automatically rebuild. So, so give that a try and see if that works. Okay, so we have a question. What are the real differences between Cubase and Nuendo? So there's a lot of different functionality is different. So when you kind of you could run Cubase, you could run Nuendo the same way as Cubase, and they'll appear identical. Nuendo will have more like ADR functionality, specific ADR toolkit. It's going to have Dolby Atmos support. It's also going to incorporate reconforming, more extensive surround sound. So if you're doing like 22.2 surround sound, it has built-in network collaboration. There's some additional plugins like the randomizer plugin for doing sound design. There's a lot of functionality for incorporating with game audio engines. So if you're using like Audio Kinetics Wise as a tool for, interfacing, with game developers, that's a great function in Nuendo. There's also some really sophisticated renaming functionality. So if you have like 100,000 audio files and your company has specific naming conventions for tying into different functions or different systems, Nuendo will have that as well. So there are some pretty significant differences between them. Okay, so we have a question from Taylor. Good to see you on the Hangout. In Pro 9, when you use VariAudio pitch correct and bounce selection or cut the clip, all pitch correction is negated. Did they fix this in 9.5 and or 10? I think the functionality is going to be the same, but we'll go ahead and try it really quick. Let me just import a file. From another project. Okay, so I'll just enable our VariAudio, and let's say if we cut this audio and move it, so it seemed like it just put a gap there. So now if I come here, double click, or let's look at both sections together. So I think the same doesn't seem to give me the message. So okay, so just going through some more questions. Okay, so we had a question, add track via track preset isn't showing user preset folders or the star rating system. So let me try it. I'm going to create a track preset myself. Okay, so now cancel the track preset. I'm going to save it. Okay. I'm just blanking on where to do this. Let me just. Okay, so that carried over the track preset, but let me just. So it looked like it worked to me. So again, if I just come here and we go to project to add track using track preset, that was the preset that we made. I'll give it 5 stars. And let's see if I do a new project. That worked without any issues, and we'll go ahead and just open that up. So our channel strip is the same. We have our plugin, so that seems to work just fine. So I guess I can't confirm that. So I'm saying a question, it's impossible to undo a mix edit, at least in 9.5. So it can be done in 9.5. So let's say if I come here, I have a number of different tracks. So it's not going to be from the undo history. But if you come here, let's say if I move the faders, you have your, within the Cubase Pro, if I come here, I just move the faders, I adjust panning, etc. You can actually see these are your mix console undo history. And I think it's Shift plus Z for undo, but you can find a keyboard shortcut, but you can do it there. And if you're in the full screen mix console, you could see your edit history laid out for you directly there. So you can do undo mix history, and that's a separate function from the undo history. So question for live performance, can you set up a number of VST instrument tracks without recorded data and trigger them from a keyboard? Yeah, certainly. And I know lots of people that do this. So, and often what they do is they set it up like each song into a folder track. So you may have like, a different instrument here. So let's say we'll add track. And let's say what you want to do is to maybe, even if you have different tracks that are stacked, at this point you could say move selected tracks to new folder. Okay, and we could call this song 1. And let's say the next one is going to be a Mystic. For song 2 will be Mystic and Pad Shop. Okay, select these two, move selected tracks to new folder. So, and now once you have this kind of set up, we'll just duplicate these for demonstration purposes. So we could think of these as, okay, you're going to have song 1, song 2, and you can give it the song names, obviously. And then you could even just have preferences. So if we go to your Cubase preferences here, you could say like editing project mix console, and you could say enable record on selected MIDI track. Or so at this point you could just come here, play that song, and then once you get to song 2, just enable record, and that will pass the MIDI to the various songs right there. So you could have song 1, just immediately jump to song 2, jump to song 3, jump to song 4, like that. Okay, so I see, why can't I resize the track editor? So I'm not sure if that's with MIDI, but if you have MIDI information here, you can kind of zoom in and out here. So you could zoom that way, but you could also just bring this up as well to make it larger. So maybe check to make sure if maybe I'm misunderstanding a question. All right, so we had someone else confirm that the track presets are working fine with the star system for them. All right. So question, are there any plans of bringing back to replace audio and video feature? It's such a basic feature that even Free does, and I don't see why an advanced program lacks it. So it will be coming back. It's just, we are in the middle, have introduced a new video engine, so they're working on it as we speak. So All right, so we had a question how to bounce a MIDI track to audio. Really, all you have to do is, if you have, we'll just do a short segment here, but all you have to do is select an event, and there's a number of different ways of doing it. So if you wanted to come here to render in place, there's different render settings. At this point, you could just say, I want to do that. And what that'll do is now just automatically add the audio track directly underneath. You could also do an export audio mix down where you could take the selected track and export that and place it back into your file. But probably the render in place functions are the fastest, easiest way to bounce a MIDI track to audio. So. And if it's an external instrument, you'd have to have it set up as, if it's like a hardware instrument, you'd have to have it set up as an external instrument, which you then which you could use the render in place functionality for. Otherwise, you just record it in real time. All right, good to see we have Ton Turbo on. Okay, so it says Loop Mash doesn't see the preset samples. I reinstalled it and same results. Sometimes when that happens, make sure you go to the media bay. And if you see media bay, you probably just want to go to like factory content or under VST sound and make sure that you'll probably see like the Loop Mash content. Make sure that that is checked. And if it is checked, what you want to do is maybe where you see the Loop Mash content, right click and choose to rescan the disk. And that will probably bring it back to life so that the program can find it. Okay, so question, how to preview a MIDI file without dragging it into the project. So I think we could do it for MIDI loops because a MIDI loop will have a particular instrument designed for it. I'll just export so I think just a MIDI loop is going to allow you to preview. Let me just make a MIDI file really quick just to make sure. All right. Just save it to my desktop really quickly. So it looks like with the MIDI loop, you could actually pick and choose directly which instrument. I don't have it sounding, but it looks like you should be able to kind of preview it through different devices there. Let me just... I probably could have a better MIDI file for that, but that you could check out just on the bottom here where you could route it to different instruments to be played back through. So seeing a question from Tom Turbo, of anyone experienced like me that the audio buffer hangs up after switching between projects and CPU load rises, excuse me, to audio dropouts, happens with UMC 404 HD and UR22, so it must be a Cubase bug. I haven't seen, or I haven't come across that, but maybe other people have, so maybe if there are people could chime in. All right, question, how to get rid of program changes in MIDI files. So it's a pretty common thing that MIDI files will have tons of program changes, and I think this is even a logical editor preset. So if you go to your logical editor presets, so you could select all of the different Okay, so if you just come right here, you could say you want to go to standard set 2 and just choose delete patch changes. So that should do the trick for you. And that is just a logical editor preset. And if we wanted to show you how to make that, we can now come over here to under standard 2. So it's basically, you want to say directly to all of your different program changes directly there, as well as your LSB, MSB values. So so we had a question about where you can change the background in the MIDI editor. So we kind of touched on this a little earlier, but so if you go to editing, to user interface, and then you'll see custom colors, and you'll see the editor background. You could just change that. If I hit OK, you'll see like the MIDI editor, change colors, or to kind of where it was roughly, just like that. So once again, preferences, user interface, custom colors. Okay, so we have a question. How do I import my old Cubase 5 projects from 2002, the .all and .arr files, into Cubase 9.5? And I've been a Cubase user since the Atari days. That's great. I've been too. So there is an older version of the program that you could download. I think if you download SX3 from our website, which will work, or SL3 for Cubase artist user, and if you download that from the website, you could run that with your current license, and that will allow you to import .all and .arr files. So you could, at that point, just simply, import those files and save them as a .cpr files. So, but the .all, .arr, kind of stopped being supported in 2001. A couple years ago, we got to do this. I took a bunch of projects with Alan Holdsworth, a late phenomenal guitarist, where he had a bunch of his Atari files and his Cubase, and we got them all imported without any problems. Okay. Just reading through comments. Thanks for everyone's great question. Okay, so a question from Taylor. When I add a VST instrument loop to a chord track, it doesn't always track accurately. What are you doing wrong? So when we have chord tracks and we tell different elements to follow a chord track, you know, play around specifically with, and as you do, let's just add a chord track real quickly. So when you go here, you know, play around with, you know, if you want it to only be in the chords or chords and scales or just scales, play around with these 3 different settings. And you could also have, you know, if you click on the voicings, at this point you could have it follow directly or synchronize track data with the chord track first. So those are some things that I would do and choose apply known chord. And so you could play around with those settings. I think you get it to work a little more predictably for you. Okay, so a question of how do you humanize MIDI notes created from the chord tracks? So start and end notes are not perfectly quantized. There's a couple of different ways. One is in the MIDI modifiers. So here you could choose to randomize the position of notes. So you could also choose to do stuff like one of the MIDI insert plugins that you can have also. You can come over here and have a quantizer plugin. So at this point, you could just say, I wanted to quantize my 16th notes. I want to have swing. And you could actually, you know, adjust a delay here for your quantize, and that will process it in real time for you. So those are 2 ways to kind of take something that has, you know, like a very kind of machine-like feel and make it feel a bit more human. All right, question. All right, so I'm just saying, does the middle mouse drag work in the in-place editor? So it's all right. Just take a quick look at it. So just my scroll wheel, you know, I'm not sure, you know, this is just my scroll wheel on the mouse, but that seems to be allowing you to work like that. So the middle mouse drag, so that seems to work there. And if you wanted to zoom, we could do that, or you could also, you know, zoom holding down like your control or command key here. So I think it kind of works the same as main project window. So, but let me know if I'm not understanding your question. Okay, so I see a question in the right-hand zone under the media tab and loops. Samples icon shows no pictures for the installed loop sets, but I can navigate to them using text. So let's say we go to our loop samples. So if you're not seeing these pictures, I don't know, it could be maybe just a perhaps corrupted preferences. So see if you start off holding down Alt Control Shift as you launch the program right after launching, or Command Option Shift on Mac to see if those pictures will get kind of refreshed. Okay, so what about side chaining LFO instead of compressor to the kick or hi-hat? So I think you could kind of get this done using kind of quick controls. So let's take a quick look. So here's where you could kind of do it. I don't know, I could play around. It may take me a little while, but here you could assign the LFO to quick controls. But I'll play around and see if I come up with a better way to maybe do side chaining in some creative way. So I see a question, will audio chord detection be coming to Cubase? I'm sure it will. I haven't heard, either way. I still think they want the technology to be kind of rock solid. So Okay, so we discussed this a little bit earlier about recording MIDI modes, of ways of recording MIDI while not recording. I've seen some people doing something like this, and again, that's just kind of the retrospective record. So if I wanted to come directly here, let's say this is where my playhead is, and I will just kind of play in some MIDI information, and then all you have to do is go to under transport, just say retrospective MIDI record, and then you could see your, the parts that you just did right there. So I'm just gonna check my audio connections here real quick. Okay. Okay, so we had someone that wanted to perhaps create a polyrhythm drum beat. So what a lot of people do to easily kind of create a polyrhythm drum beat is, let's say if we have two instrument tracks, you can set up a MIDI plugin. So you can just run it as like a MIDI insert called Beat Designer. And what this will allow you to do is you could actually choose to have 9 divisions on this track. And if you go to another track here, you could have a Beat Designer. And here you could choose to have 7 divisions, and you could program beats on either of the beat designers and kind of do polyrhythms that way. So you could have one beat designer here, and let's say we have another beat designer. So if you want to do 7/8 and 9/8 together. So a lot of people use Beat Designer for doing that. So question, when creating a loop with a pickup beat, is there any way that the pickup note can be heard when a loop comes back around? 4-bar loop with a pickup on the fourth before the first bar. You could probably just edit it to do that. Or, if you have a particular, let's say you have your drum loop. Here, so we'll go to our media, and let's say let me just. All right, so say if you have that, you could just kind of set a range for the loop. So if you grab the range selection, you could have your loop, just loop kind of like that, where the loop point. But otherwise, that's probably the best way to make that work. All right. Okay, Gary Corbeck, good to see you online. So VST performance meter. So you could just access that if you can't find it by hitting F12. You could also, so if you come to the options here, you can see your audio performance meter here. You could also have it directly on your transport bar as well. So maybe, Gary, if you could just let me know what question you have about the VST performance meter, that could be helpful too. Good to see you on the Hangout. Okay, so it says, I'm new to Cubase, coming from Pro Tools. I can't figure out how to do a roll edit, which tool to do that. So probably what I think you're probably talking about, I may have the terminology wrong. Like if you wanted to, you could grab like the range selection tool here. And then if you go to edit to range, at this point, you could just say, I wanted to, cut time, and that will move the edit over like that. So if we watch that again, so I could select just this particular range in time, go to edit, and just say cut time. And that will kind of do, some people, there's different terminology for that, but I think that may be what you want to do. So if not, just let me know in the comments. So we have a question, does Cubase have a master bus compressor? So, there's no real definitive difference between a, master bus compressor versus a normal compressor. So you can come here and have a standard compressor just on the instrument or just on the channel strip for that. A tube compressor, which is really pretty phenomenal, or a vintage compressor. And you could see each of these different compressors also with their different user interfaces here. And if we wanted to see kind of the standard compressor, so these will all work great. They also all show up under your dynamics. So you could have different, I know that the tube compressor has become a favorite among a lot of like really discerning mastering engineers. So you could use that. Or again, the vintage compressor. And going directly to under your dynamics, is standard compressor. That's an add-on compressor. So we come here to your standard compressor, and then you have multi-band variations of some of these as well. So if you wanted to have your multi-band compressor or expander, you can do all that quite easily. So I see a question: does Cubase Pro have a dynamic EQ? Um, it a lot of people, it doesn't come with a dynamic EQ. We have a really good one inside of Wavelab, but you can get some pretty phenomenal results. A lot of people overlook like an amazing EQ plugin called Frequency. Um, so this will allow you to come directly over here, have mid side or left right independent. So each band is linear phase. So you could EQ different your right channel or left channel, or if we come to channel 6, you could also have this show up as your mid side, where those could be independent within the single band. You could also come over here and adjust, the frequencies just by typing in the note number or dragging where you see the piano keyboard indicated right there. Also, you could have different results for, where you could just audition different elements as you move. The outer bands can have, when we go to, let's say, our shelf, or let's say our like a low shelf EQ, and we could have this be, like a, incredibly powerful. So if you want to do, like a notch EQ as well. So, and you can have up to 96 dB of, on your shelf as well. So you could do like very powerful stuff, but it's not necessarily dynamic EQ, but our Wavelab program has that. And as someone said, using that in conjunction with an insert. Okay, so someone's asking what's the best tutorial for a Cubase 6 person to find out if I'm using all my plugins or if they're still dormant under my downloads. If you have generally all the plugins are installed with the program by default, so you should be able to have access to it. So question, best software for recording vocals and mixing. Yeah, so Cubase does really great with that, not only for the sonic quality of the engine, but also with built-in auto alignment and built-in tuning. So, and someone else answered Cubase 10, so I would tend to agree, but I could be biased. Okay. So, question, is there a calendar for Club Cubase so I can plan to attend and not miss half of these? These will always be available online. The calendar can vary, because it really depends upon my travel schedule, which can be pretty extensive. So at times, I may not be able to get to different ones, but, we're going to see if we can get one more in before the end of the year. But I may be taking some vacation time, but if you subscribe, we'll try to give you, to the Facebook groups or to subscribe to the channel. You'll always get notified, and they're always available afterwards. So, but each month could be different with calendars and trade shows and different travels that I have to do. Okay, so we had a question about setting up like a almost like a preset for score editor. So let's come over here. Okay, so let's say we're in our score editor and we go to page mode. So what you could do is if you actually just double click to the left of like maybe the first bar, you can double click here, and here you could see whether you want it to be a split. Sometimes you may open this up and it'll look kind of like this, where it's all on one staff, which doesn't make any sense if you're a piano player. So you could have this set to a split staff. We could also say I wanted to do display quantizing. I wanted to come here and consolidate rest. I wanted a little bit of synchronization. And when we come here, if you're doing like orchestral transposition instruments, You can say, okay, I want this for my F horn. And at this point, you could click on presets and you could just store a preset directly here. So you probably wouldn't do an orchestral, like a horn transposition for the key of F. But if I just now hit apply, we can just click here, and we'll just call this piano. And now if I, wanted to call that up at any time, I could just say, I wanted this to be for, guitar. And at this point, we could see like, different guitar tab. Or if I wanted this to be piano, at that point, just hit apply. And all those different presets will allow you to, I want this to be for my cello. So it would change the clef probably as we do this, and we click piano, and those presets will be recalled and stored. All right, so we see questions about when the bug fix is coming for some VST and VSTI crash Cubase 10. So I think we'll see one soon. So look for it in the next week or so, I think is maybe what I'd heard, but just kind of keep your eyes out. In Groove Agent 5, can we create styles to use the style player? I think that, I'm not absolutely sure, but I think that the styles may be kind of pre-done because they could be quite involved with all the different variations, but I'm not absolutely certain. But I could look into it just to make sure. So I get to see a question from David. What is the recommended Windows laptop configuration? RAM, i3, i5, i7. Get the, definitely go with an i7. 16 gigabytes of RAM is what I use in my Windows laptop and my MacBook. If I could get more, my next I'll get more for doing more sample libraries. So definitely like an i7 or the new AMD chips. I've heard great things about those. I'm not sure if they're in the laptop realm with the Ryzen chips. But that's something to look at. But definitely kind of the most RAM you can get, and the fastest processor will definitely help. And if anything, it gives you additional longevity for use of the laptop. So I've had a 16 gigabyte of RAM with a 500 gig SSD for examples, and a 256 gig SSD for programs. i7 with 16 gigs RAM, and I've had that for 4 years now, almost this week, and it's still running great. So. So I see a question, will there be any updates to Chord? It's a great tool. I haven't heard of anything, but I'll pass that on as a feature request. So let's see, in the floating transport panel, the metronome button is missing. So let's take a look at it. Oh, wrong button. Sorry about that. So when I open up my floating metronome, it's there. So make sure that, you have all the different options enabled. But here my floating metronome screen is there as expected. So take a look and see if you get that, but it could be perhaps that, make sure that you have I think it's under tempo and time signatures, that is, or maybe it's not there. but my metronome is definitely there. So make sure you activate all the different options from the cog wheel here. And you may have to expand some of these as well. You can move it to the left or right to get more options available, but my metronome is there. All right, so question, in previous versions, you could control plus mouse wheel to change colors in the track. It seems like you can't do this anymore. What's up with that? Is there an easier way to color without having? And so what I understand, yeah, I never colorized it that way. But if you come here, let's say this is our active project. If you just kind of grab your mouse scroll wheel here, so I know it's not from there, but if you just hover over this, at that point you could go through all your colors like so. So I'm seeing a question, does an extensive Ultimate DVD exist for Cubase 6? I've had this program for years and I'm struggling. There may be some DVDs you may want to check out. Ask Audio. I know at some point they kind of stopped doing from DVDs to kind of more probably like a YouTube based thing or like an online system for delivering the videos. So you may want to look at that for older versions like Cubase 6 and see if that does, if there are. But there's a lot of great resources available on, like, you know, if you go to Club Cubase, there's a lot of version 5, version 6 tutorials on YouTube, or go to the Cubase channel on YouTube as well. All right, so just seeing a question that was directed to Ed Rugman, asking if the compressor on the channel strips works just as well. So yes, it definitely does. All right, just going through some more of the questions. I got a little bit out. Okay, just scrolling back. Thanks everyone for great questions. Okay, just scrolling through some questions here. I got a little out of place. Okay, so we have a question. If tempo detect the audio files you recorded, can you add more tracks and we'll go in tempo? So I'll play you a project that someone sent me that was an interesting scenario. So where in this, all right, so let's say, and the problem was that someone had like 2 different tempos for a recording. So kind of a Christmassy. So what they had was, just like one of those like total panic scenarios that had to be fixed like within 30 minutes, is we kind of took this and they had a sequence track and they had like a real musician playing. But the real musician wasn't playing in time at all. Let me just move this over a little bit here so you can kind of hear. And there's like 2 different tempos. So this is just, so that's obviously slower than the backing track. So they wanted to know how to fix this, and this kind of goes with, like, I have two different files with different tempos. How can I make them match up? So what we could do is I'm going to go to this, and we'll say, let's go to our tempo detection. So I take each of the files and I move them slightly apart in time. And what I want to do is to go to my tempo detection from my project menu. And we'll say analyze. Okay, and it's done an analysis of the tempo for that. I will close this. And now what I want to do is do a tempo detection of the first part. So this part was obviously much slower than the first part. So what we could do now is I'm going to select this file, and these are all the different tempo changes. And what I want to do is to embed the tempo changes of this file, but make it follow the tempo changes of this. And to do that, you go to the audio menu, go to advanced, and we'll say set definition from tempo. And at this point, this embeds all the tempo information of that particular project or this particular audio file to this. So I'm going to just kind of drag it over now, and we're going to place this into musical mode. And as we do this, we'll just... and we'll manually line it up. Okay, so just come here. Okay, so I'm just going to... all right, and I'm just going to zoom in a little more and get this... So now this audio file, even though it had completely different tempos, recorded slower, is now matching up to the tempo of the top file. And if I just took that out of musical mode, that's where the file was originally, and placing into musical mode now follows the tempo from the original file. So I think that should answer the question with that. Question, do you know if it's possible to run more than one Mackie protocol? I'm integrating NI Complete keyboard and Maschine since Maschine is in. I do have weird results with transport, etc. So yeah, you could definitely run more than one Mackie control. And you could run multiple control surfaces inside of Cubase without any issue. So you may want to settle on using one as transport. Okay. So question, when a folder track is selected, is the content synced in the inspector? Can I select something in the inspector folder and record to the selected track from there? We'll go ahead and just test this to make sure I'm understanding correctly. I'll just do a new... Okay, so when the folder track is selected and the content synced in, so I'm not sure what you mean by is the content synced in the inspector. So it's not going to necessarily do a, like, it can do like arming and monitoring in solo. I don't have probably an audio input selected there, but you could globally set those, but it's not going to do stuff. It's not intended to do stuff like EQs and send levels. For that, you'd want to probably do it in the mix console and use the quick link. So if you come here, we could activate this. And so now if I wanted to come here to the quick link and that's turned on, I could now set this up if I'm understanding you correctly. So I could just say, okay, let's put that plug in on all those channels at once. So you could think of like the folder tracks as being more like organization on a project window. And the second part of the question was, can I select something in the inspector folder and record it to the selected track from there? So you could definitely kind of select one part and record directly within the selected folder there. Okay, so the question is, when I import an audio track from an external disk and I press copy file to active project, still if I disconnect the external hard disk, Cubase can't locate the file. Probably what you'd want to do is in the pool window, it could still be referencing the file that's on the hard disk. So let me just, if I selected a number of different files here, okay, so probably what you want to do is in the pool window, you'll see a function for prepare archive. And then at that point, just say external files will be copied into the working directory. So it could, even though it was maybe copied, it might still be using the file from the older version. So check that. But again, go into the media menu to the pool window and just try doing a prepare archive and see if that solves it for you. Okay. So you see a question, I always see missing files message each time I log in. How do I sort this? You can choose to ignore it is one of the things, but you should also make sure that, you have all the files that you're supposed to have. So sometimes, again, going into your media bay, and at this point, going into like your VST sound or factory content and just refreshing these. So just kind of select one of the folders and rescan. And, if you have an idea of like what files it's asking for, it'll probably give you an idea, like if it's a particular library. So that may give you an idea where to look in the media bay to rescan and make sure that you have the files there. Okay, I'm just going over here. Thanks everyone for wonderful questions. Hope everyone's learning something. Got just a couple more minutes. We'll get some more questions in before I have to drive to get my son. Someone said I shouldn't say pick up my son, that he falls too much. So question is, when I have projects with lots of tracks that at least fill up the screen vertically, I find it hard to zoom in on a track at the bottom vertically with the mouse. Okay, so let me just set up a scenario here. All right. All right. So, question is, okay, I'll read it again. When I have projects with lots of tracks that at least fill up the screen vertically, I find it hard to zoom in on a track at the bottom vertically with the mouse. Is there a way to be able to set the scrolling so you can always scroll down to leave the bottom track at least half up on your screen? I don't know a way of doing that, but there is one other clever thing that might be helpful. So, say if I have all these different tracks here, under the edit menu is to select enlarge selected track. So, as you kind of scroll up and down, that will always be kind of larger to see. So, if I just select a different track here, I don't know of a way to automatically kind of have it scroll and kind of be in the middle at all times. But see if you go to the edit menu to enlarge selected track, if that helps. Okay, so track editor, channel editor, where the insert sends live, the window will not resize. Let's take a look at it. I think it might be a fixed size. Yeah, so I think that is going to be a fixed size for that. So we had a question: how does VST Transit work? I may not have the correct license on this, but if we go to the VST Cloud, yeah, I don't have the correct license currently. But basically, what you could do is you could upload your project or tracks to the cloud, in essence, and then you could share those with other people so they could edit or make tweaks or do mixes for you, and they could share and augment your tracks with different edits or be able to, add other parts or vocal edits. So okay, so we have a question. I'm late. Been having trouble getting any audio loops to follow the chord track without going crazy. So the audio as it follows a chord track is basically designed for monophonic audio. So if you're doing like chords and stuff like that, it's not intended to work with that. So we answered this question a little while ago, but once again, someone asking about the ability to export the audio back into a video file. So I'm not sure when it's going to be coming in. I'll reiterate it. I know I'll be seeing the Cubase project and planning manager at NAMM next month. So I'll be able to kind of talk to him more, but I've expressed it to him before. All right, I'm just gonna. All right, so we'll take a look if there's. All right, so question on Harmonics Sonic SE. So I think the FXB might be here. So it might be that you would open it up from here, which would be the multi-program. I think that if that's what you're asking. So instead of loading up different patches here, you might have to, I think maybe if you just click there. So give that a try. So quick question, will Beat Designer be able to recognize third-party names? So I'll just come here, let's load up a quick drum map so we can come here to Beat Designer. And it really just takes on the drum map. So if you have drum maps for your third-party tools, you could then at that point you could just see your drum maps. So a lot of programs, third-party companies will have drum maps for, but that's all that is reading is the drum maps. Okay. And last question we'll do before I have to leave is going to be people asked about tape saturation. So there's great plugins. You know, Steinberg is the first company to offer this way back when. But if I go to, let's say, an audio track, even on the channel strip, you have Magneto 2, which is a great, which is the very first analog tape saturation plugin that was ever invented. So, and you can find this under distortion. So you go to Magneto 2 for that, and that's a great plugin to be working with. All right, I know we still have other questions, but I have to wrap it up. We've been going about 3 hours now. I want to thank everyone for their questions. If you found this video, if you found the Hangout helpful, please feel free to like the video and to subscribe to the channel. I hope that everyone has learned something useful and came up with a couple new tips and tricks. And if you subscribe to the channel, you'll be notified of more events as they come out. So, and again, thanks everyone. I thought it was just great questions, and I hope that everyone has a great holiday season. So, and gets to have some great time with friends and family, and have a little time to make some great music in your Cubase. And thank you so much, and we'll do it again. Look for an announcement. I'll see if I can get one more in, but with the holidays it may be busy, so we may just go straight to January, but we'll try to get an announcement. And we hope everyone has a great Christmas or whatever holidays you're celebrating. So have a wonderful time, and we'll see you on the next Hangout. Thank you.